For this small Wisconsin community of under 700 persons, 10 years of trying to forget have been wiped away in a single day. The return of the name of Ed Gein means return of memories, memories that many have been trying to forget.
In 1957, this small-town Wisconsin horror story was being exposed to the world.
Ed Gein, he's the first well-known American serial killer. But it's the fact that he repurposed people's bodies, and that's what's so upsetting about him.
Ed Gein has been going to graves and digging up, excavating bodies.
He took skin and fashioned lampshades with it and upholstery on his chair and couch. I've never had a case where a person wanted to wear somebody else's skin. I don't think I ever heard of a case like that in the annals of crime.
It might be satisfying to defile dead bodies, but there's nothing more powerful than killing someone.
It's like he ran out of bodies, so he decided to create his own. I'd never heard Gein's voice, so to now actually encounter this incredible piece of first-hand evidence is astonishing to me.
It's the only known recording of Ed Gein.
That's incredible. Oh, that's awesome. Yes!
Yes!
I mean, no one knew of the existence of this tape.
We've been debating for years, like, what did Ed Gein sound like?
I have been playing Ed Gein in my brain for so long.
I don't know what to expect.
Who helped you when you got him out of the grave? Nobody.
Officer just told them that they found some more heads up there.
What did you intend to do with their body?
What would you do with the head?
That must have been taken from reading about these magazines and everything. Taking the flesh off like a headhunter.
I mean, this casts a whole new light on the Gein case.
For a researcher, we're always looking for data that gets us closer to the phenomenon.
He knows there are things he can't tell the police.
What would you do with the sexual part?
That was in.
One was painted, they said.
The term serial killer doesn't come out for another 20, 30 years after Ed Gein was caught. I think it's why people adopt some of the details for movies.
Gein was so enmeshed with his mother that he wanted to become his mother.
Ed Gein was Norman Bates, and Norman Bates was Ed Gein. The comparison between the two of them was so right on.
Well, a boy's best friend is his mother.
You would take the heads off.
That's right.
Would you enjoy it while you were doing it?
That's the worst part of it. I really didn't think.
I've always been interested in monsters. I had actually been working on a book about horror movies. And it was then that I discovered that both Psycho and Texas Chainsaw Massacre had been inspired by Ed Gein. I wrote the book Deviant, which I consider the definitive biography of Ed Gein. I'd never heard Gein's voice.
Restless, that way feeling?
There are some kind of newsreel images of Gein. One when he was arrested and one at his trial. But you don't hear Gein's voice. So to now actually encounter this incredible piece of first-hand evidence is astonishing to me. Eddie is such a mythic figure. Hearing, this actual human voice, it just makes these crimes that much more real.
Now, we want to get this all straightened out. Clean down.
What did you intend to do with her body, Mr. Warden?
That,
Well, you kind of thought you were deer hunting.
that's the way it could be.
On this particular day, pretty much the entire male population, as well as some of the female population of Plainfield, was out in the woods. It was the first day of deer hunting season. Frank Warden, who runs the hardware store with his mother, Bernice Warden, returns from a day of deer hunting. As soon as Frank enters a store, he's stunned to see a trail of blood leading from the sales counter out through the back. He also spots some .22 caliber shell casings on the floor. He runs to the cash register and he notices that there's a receipt made out for some antifreeze. Frank Warden had been in the store the previous day. Ed Gein came in asking about the price of antifreeze and also what Frank regarded as pestering Bernice, sort of floating the idea of their going out on a date, roller skating.
Well, you ever asked Mrs. Warden to go out with you some evening?
No, I never asked her that way. It was just a joke. You see this door there? That's all I went up here. And I said, "Can you roller skate?" She said, "No." I said, "Well, I'd like to have somebody go with me to hold me up because I never roller skate in my life either."
So immediately Frank Warden suspects that Gein is somehow involved.
Now, like I mentioned, I went in there afterwards, but I took my antifreeze out, went in there afterwards.
Eddie Gein was generally seen as kind of an oddball. People saw him as somewhat simple-minded, completely harmless.
How long did you say you'd known Mr. Gein?
Well, I've known him ever since he was a little
boy.
He's lived here all his life in this farm?
Well, I don't know whether he was born here or not, but the family moved up here around 50 years ago, probably, and I knew his dad more than 40 years ago when he used to haul potatoes in town.
Frank immediately notifies Sheriff Schley, and Schley and a deputy proceed directly to the farmhouse. They approach the house, Eddie's not home, and they go around to the woodshed.
Well, I haven't been out to your place at all. I don't know anything about your place. There's a woodshed right next to the house?
That would be west.
Is it attached to the house?
That's right.
The door going from the woodshed into the house, is that right?
That's right.
There are no lights. They enter the shed, completely dark. Suddenly they're confronted with this absolutely appalling sight. Bernice Worden's naked corpse strung up by her heels.
Mrs. Worden, how was she tied up there by her feet? With rope or?
Well, there wasn't rope. I remember that.
Bernice Worden, this grandmother, her naked body is strung up from the rafters. She's been split open entirely, completely eviscerated. Her head has been cut off and is nowhere to be seen. You know, she's up there like some game animal that's been dressed out after the kill.
What did you intend to do with her body, Mr. Worden?
Years ago, when I was going to go deer hunting, I was experimenting, you know. I was supposed to go deer hunting. I put that up and was going to go deer hunting. That's what she was hanging from. You know, whether I'd seen her and she was a deer like, or...
Well, that's probably it.
I'm looking at the official autopsy report on Bernice Worden's body. It reads in part, the body of a murdered and mutilated woman, Mrs. Bernice Worden, has been found in the woodshed of the old Gein farmhouse. The body had been found hanging by the heels from the roof bars, decapitated and eviscerated. Head and viscera had been found in the same location, the vulva in a box, and the heart in a plastic bag. So after Schley and his deputy kind of collect themselves a little bit, they go back and they're able to enter the house through the shed, which adjoins the house, and immediately they start stumbling on these other utterly horrific, utterly nightmarish sights.
On last podcast on the left, we like to what we call is defang the monster. But somebody like Ed Gein, whose sheer, for lack of a better word, playfulness of his crimes and what he was like as a person mixed with what he actually did is extremely unique. You see in his house too, like truly it's an exteriorization of his own mind.
Meanwhile, Ed has been located at the home of this neighbor of his, and they take Gein into custody.
Well, then, what kind of a knife did you use?
Well, I made that from a firearms, you know. We go out and making knives from files.
Well,
And grind it down.
put a good edge on it?
Yeah.
You grind it yourself?
Yeah.
Good hard steel.
Yeah, well, it has to be. When I made that, no idea what I was going to use it for.
Also just told me that they found some more heads up there.
Skulls?
Yeah. Mhm. So there must have been more graves, huh? Oh, nice.
Ed Gein, there's been so much out there about him in popular media. For a researcher, it's, you know, we're always looking for data that gets us closer to the phenomenon. I wanted to hear the man himself. Most serial killers that we know of, at least through the history of serial killing, are quite aware of what they're doing and are very intentional in their actions and just show no remorse. For us as social and behavioral scientists, we can guess at their motivations and the things that are driving them to commit violent crimes, but usually the words coming from the mouths of the people themselves are the best source.
What would you do with the sexual part?
I wouldn't enjoy it or anything.
Would you enjoy it while you were doing it?
My immediate reaction to listening to Gein is that he displays little or no emotion. He's being interviewed for the very first time about years of a behavior that's quite bizarre and ghoulish. And you have to imagine that this guy's been living inside his head for a lot of years. He wasn't being overly defensive, and he wasn't being really angry, or he wasn't acting annoyed. I mean, it's almost like this was a non-event, which is kind of interesting, given the time period that this whole thing took place.
I think we have to remember this was like in the 1950s. This was a time when there was a kind of idyllic notion of the American family. You work hard, you have like a house with a picket fence and 2 kids and that kind of thing. Ed Gein's arrest must have been a massive shock to the American psyche and to the world because it disrupts this picture. He's a kind of meek, unremarkable man who could have been your neighbor. And there's something eerie about that is disruptive to our collective ideas of what is a monster.
Ed was born when his parents were living in La Crosse, Wisconsin. They were owners of a small kind of general store. He was the second child born to the family. We know very little about Ed Gein's older brother, Henry. From what we know and what we gather, George Gein was a somewhat feckless, unreliable individual. He was also evidently an alcoholic.
George Gein, his life began in tragedy. It's Ed Gein's entire upbringing from, 40 years before he was born, it's like it was ordained. George Gein coming to Wisconsin, his entire family dies crossing a river, and he was adopted by a different family. He is in no way whatsoever wanted, and then, of course, becomes a drunk.
Having a father that's an alcoholic, when he's drunk, who's prone to violence, is a rough spot to be in. Well, for anyone, but particularly in a place where there's little or no likelihood of being rescued. That abuse can later on manifest in so many different ways. One can only guess at what some of the escapist fantasies might have been for this guy. His mother was the better of two choices, obviously. Even if she were somewhat aloof or cold, might have been overly controlling.
From all available evidence, Augusta had been raised in a very, very stern, strict Lutheran household. In many ways, she fits the model of a classic kind of religious fanatic who is obsessed with the evils of the sins of the flesh.
The lips of a strange woman drip honey, and her mouth is smoother than oil.
Ed was subjected throughout his childhood to Augusta's harangues about the evils of womanhood and the decadence and corruption of the modern world, and all the evil temptations that Ed might be exposed to.
You cannot hide behind your beauty. Your beauty has made you evil.
Augusta, she was a harrowing influence on Ed Gein.
Ed Gein, he grew up under the shadow of his mother's fanaticism. So I think he probably had this very paradoxical relationship to his mom, where on one hand, she was the source of everything, his life, his sense of right and wrong, but on the other hand, felt resentful.
Ed was a very extreme pathological form of what used to be called a mama's boy. Augusta was a saint who could do no wrong. Whenever he spoke about her after his arrest, he would burst into tears.
When you have someone who's chronologically an adult male, but yet they're psychologically fused with their mother, the worst case scenario is a kind of psychological incest. How did they come to be so close? And why was he unable to extricate himself from this relationship? This was the only person that he had any enduring contact with. So if there's any intimacy in his life, it was with his mother. And by that I mean, of course, emotional or psychological intimacy. Now, we don't know if there was any physical or sexual intimacy, but it can't be ruled out.
When you want to understand this type of psychopathology that is so strong and so deviant, it's not just a result of poor parenting. He hated his mother did this to him, his mother did that to him. This is much, much deeper than that. There's so many people that are brought up in all of these bizarre sorts of ways. Almost none of them go out and do what Gein did. Some people have described Augusta as being a rigid Christian woman who sees sex as sinful and women as sinful. And Gein was to promise his mother never to have sex with women, stay by yourself. Everyone's a bad, bad person. That's not Christianity. That's mental illness. And I think the biggest component that Ed Gein got from his mother is some sort of mental disorder, not necessarily her poor parenting, which never helps, but there's some level of mental illness with the both of them.
Augusta seemed to see wickedness and sinfulness all around her. She came to see La Crosse as kind of a Midwestern Sodom and Gomorrah. And so she finally persuaded her husband to move to Plainfield, this small farming community.
It was a little town of farmers. There was no irrigation like there is now. It was what you call a poor community. Nobody was better or worse than the other guy, who was all equal poor. When I first knew about Ed, see, I was only 8, 9 years old is all it was. And he was just part of the group. But he was always pleasant, not troublesome or anything like that. I mean, he was just different. I don't know how to explain different, but he was just kind of different.
We got Bernice Wharton here. Ed, Augusta, and Henry are about 100 feet to my left down there. I think one of his victims is right behind us in the trees. My family came down from Quebec, Canada, and we live in Wisconsin. Love the weather, love the people. Good place to live and raise your family. It's right here. So I was driving to Plainfield a couple times a week, and I noticed that hardware store, and I started reading the books on Ed Gein and really got obsessed with it. So I started researching it right after that, and wrote 2 books on it. Everybody say hi to Ed. This is it.
Why is there no tombstone?
Well, it kept getting stolen. Got George on the end, and you got Augusta here. Ed's here, and Henry's on the end. A lot of people come under and visit Ed, and take some of his mother's tombstone, apparently. There's a lot missing compared to the last time I was here. There's a lot of history within Plainfield is right there. April 1st of 1940, George died from basically drinking. He didn't do nothing, basically drink. So once he died, the boys started working more around town, earning money to support the family. So he wasn't really missed.
gefällt man Showspotter sein. Und zweitens, Sie wollten, Herr...
Henry had to go down for the draft in 42.
The first number drawn by the Secretary of War is serial number 158.
Henry got rejected because he's too old.
Henry seems to have been the more, let's say, well-adjusted of the two, though it wouldn't be hard to be more well-adjusted than Ed Gein. Henry kind of saw Augusta for what she was, and he wasn't going to let himself be totally dominated by her in the way Ed did. There's some evidence that he, was trying a little bit to wean his younger brother away from Augusta's influence.
It's not like Henry Gein was the normal brother who would have been just fine had he moved to Milwaukee.
Henry Gein actually kind of creeps me out almost more than Ed, because it's like, Henry, you could have gotten the fuck out of there if you wanted to, where it's just been like, Ed is obviously mixed a little different.
These guys are spending many nights on the front porch, sitting in front of their mother, her reading them sections from the Bible, and Henry at this point, he wants to get away.
Ed's brother might have been urging Ed to leave, talking about how terrible Mother was. Maybe he couldn't tolerate it. Maybe he found that so offensive. And maybe he was jealous of his brother's ability to break away.
They're in their early 40s at this time, and Henry, for the first time, brings up to his brother, "I think maybe you're a little too close to Mom."
Don't do that. Don't say that to Eddie.
I can understand the older brother saying, well, this really isn't a place I want to wind up staying. Whereas Ed just couldn't, so he was stuck. It's kind of like being psychologically enslaved, like no one physically tied him to a chair, but he was kind of psychologically tied to the chair.
And later on in his life, Henry actually found a girl that he wanted to move in with, and she actually had a child of her own, and that was against everything Augusta taught him. And I think that's what happened when he died. The reason why he died was Ed got upset.
This is a newspaper article from May 19th, 1944. Funeral services were held here this afternoon for Henry Gein, 42, town of Plainfield farmer, who died of a heart attack while trying to protect his farm from the ravages of a grass and brush fire. And the evening, several hours after the search began, found the dead body of Mr. Gein, lying face down. Apparently the man had been dead for some time when he was found, and it appeared that death was the result of a heart attack.
It was a normal farming afternoon when Ed Gein and his brother Henry were out in a field burning brush. Supposedly, Ed was separated from his brother, and Ed ran back to town.
Ed ran back to town and said he couldn't find his brother. And the police came out, and Ed led him right to where Henry was laying face down in the grass. And there was a bump on the back of his head. And so they basically ruled that he died of asphyxiation, and the police stopped investigating.
Such accidents were not uncommon because when you start a brush fire, you know, there's a great deal of smoke involved, and there have been other people who had died of smoke inhalation.
All I heard is that they thought that Ed had maybe murdered his brother, but we don't know that. I don't know. Heard that he was jealous of his brother. Don't know that either.
Ultimately, we'll never know, and only Ed Gein would know. But the circumstances of the case, and when we look at his life history and the intense attachment that he had to his mother, you could come up with a very plausible explanation that he wanted to have his mother to himself.
We all know he did it.
Shortly after Henry died, Augusta suffered a stroke. And suddenly Ed found himself taking care of his mother.
Ed suddenly has a one-on-one relationship with his mother, this person who is his everything.
Augusta had always been the one who had taken care of Ed. Now he found himself dressing her and feeding her, helping her.
Augusta, she was bedridden, and Ed actually used to climb in bed with her and stroke her and stuff and caress her and that, and to make her happy, took care of her, kind of the way he wanted it.
Of course, Eddie was very, very devastated to see this woman who he'd always regarded as godlike suddenly reduced to this kind of state.
Augusta died on December 29, 1945, a year after Henry. The descriptions they have of Ed Gein at her funeral, his face covered in snot, saying that she was too good for this world. Ed Gein was so obsessed with her and so ensconced in the world that she created for him that a fuse blew.
Ed really only had one close relationship in his whole life. He wasn't close to his brother. He hated his father. You know, Augusta was his entire emotional world. And now she was gone.
He was living in squalor. Once his mom is no longer around, he's left to his own devices. He feels this tremendous sense of loss and trauma, and he descends into this darkness.
So from that point on, Ed really becomes obsessed with resurrecting his mother somehow.
He went to her grave and prayed every night for her to rise from the grave. I mean, he would go night after night. Please rise, please, mother, please come back.
These are Ed Gein's medical records dated December 19th, 1957. It reads, after the death of his mother, he felt that he had a special power whereby he could raise the dead to life by an act of his willpower.
I guess he couldn't tolerate the idea of being separated from his mother. Despite the fact she was dead, I guess the idea that he might be able to possess her corpse or her body would be a source of comfort for him.
There could have been a part of him that was fearful of, digging up his mother's corpse and realizing that that was, you know, a shell of his mother. It wasn't actually his mother anymore.
It raises more questions. What were you planning to do with your mother? Like, were you going to stuff her and turn her into a doll? Was there some kind of a desire to physically be with his mother? And in that sense, I do mean sexually.
How long ago did you start?
Like I say, might be 4 years.
And this woman, 4 years since you've been into a grave, huh?
That's right.
What time of the year was this when you did this?
Anytime.
Anytime.
Jump for the ice. This is the grave site of Eleanor Adams. This is one of the graves that was actually exhumed a couple days after they caught Ed, and they got down to the casket, opened up, and it was empty.
Well, which was the first grave that you went into?
Yeah.
Adams. Did you know her when she was alive?
Not really. No.
Augusta's buried probably, say, about 12 feet off from here. It's so close. I mean, very close.
In Gein's case, he was following this. He knew when there was a funeral, he read about it in the paper, and would dig the corpse up almost the next day or that evening. Why? Because the dirt at that point would be very soft and it would be easy to get out.
Would you work all night at that? I should think you have.
That's right.
Recent grave?
That's right.
Well, how would you know when to go to the cemetery?
Well, I have to think it through.
See, somebody died and
That's right.
When the judge is sort of telling him and reviewing details with him in the case, he kind of goes along with the details and says, yeah, that's probably what happened. He's not denying it, but he's also not confessing to it. So I think he's sort of taking this kind of like passive approach to his role in this. He has been going to graves and digging up, excavating bodies and using their body parts. That process, you know, is very difficult in its own ways. There's practical challenges that come with digging a body up that is typically buried 6 feet underground.
Who helped you when you got him out of the grave?
Nobody.
Did they cave in on you?
Did, but they should have, I guess.
Clearly, he had a number of fantasies or ideas about what needed to be done with these bodies. I mean, there's a reason for digging up these graves and taking these women out.
Someone doesn't wake up one day and say, I think I'll go out and start digging up bodies in a cemetery. No, this begins 10, 15, 20 years earlier in the offender's mind, in his fantasies. Now, sometimes fantasy serves as a substitute for action, but other times fantasy paves the way for later action. In Gein's case, it's pretty obvious that his fantasy was so strong, he actually acted it out and did it.
There's a kind of fantasy life, and then there's actually the reality of like dealing with bodies that have decomposed very badly in the ground for sometimes years.
How many graves did you open?
Well,
When you'd cut the bodies apart?
well, there's some I didn't really
Never took home?
That's
You
right.
know, just opened up the
That's right.
casket and
That's right.
cut them apart there?
That's right.
It's quite bizarre. I mean, after all, how many bodies do you need?
He wanted the bodies, and he mutilated the bodies and desecrated the bodies. But what he did with the body parts is itself extraordinary.
He would dig up these corpses and bring them back to his farmhouse and dissect them and fashion different artifacts out of the body parts.
The word that people used over and over again after they discovered the house was revolting. And that to me was the perfect adjective for what was going on in there.
I don't understand how you dig out the grave. Just tell me how you do this. You would take the parts out and put her back in the coffin.
Yes.
And take the heads off.
Out of, you know, you walk into his room and he's got skulls on each of the four bedposts. You know, he's got a box full of vulvas with little ribbons wrapped around
Somebody's
them.
jealous.
That were very, very popular at the time, which would have articles about things like headhunting.
Then what would you do with the head?
That must have been taken from reading about these magazines and everything. Taking the flesh off like a headhunter.
He would sit there and read, you know, these books, you know, these true crime books, true crime magazines. He loved
eating beans.
Eating beans, reading about Nazis making lampshades out of human skin.
These acts seem to have been modeled to some extent on the Nazi atrocity magazines.
For a guy like Ed, discovering photographs or newsreels from World War II, maybe he couldn't have imagined that before he saw it.
In the Gein case, he took skin and fashioned lampshades with it and upholstery on his chair and couch.
The fact is, you see all the bodies piled up and you see people as disposable. You understand that people were experimented with. If you're inclined emotionally or psychologically to that type of thinking, even if you don't want to admit it, it grabs your attention in sort of the wrong way.
There was apparently a belt he made out of nipples. It was this totally nightmarish environment.
I think the notion of using the human flesh or skin to make objects or to upholster a chair or something like that is kind of peculiar, almost suggests to me that you are finding comfort in that these skulls are keeping you company and that you're so disturbed that you feel that you're surrounded by people.
Geen isn't disinterring bodies because he's lonely and has nobody to talk to. This is very perverse behavior, and the level of his disturbance goes really to the core of his personality and to the core of his sexual dynamics.
What parts would you take home? The head and the sexual part. And you cut them up? Yeah.
The sexual instinct itself is very, very strong.
Being involved, they drive the money.
Where would you put them to dry?
Got a room, I'll just put them there.
When Geen looks at what he did and he sees the heads all over the place, this is very arousing to him. This is very stimulating to him because look at the domination he has over these people. He can cut them up, he can desecrate them in all these various ways. He has total domination. That is very, very arousing for somebody like Geen.
He is on record saying that he didn't have sexual relations with corpses.
This may come as a shock to people. Criminal defendants don't always tell the truth. They lie all the time. So you really can't go by what Geen said. When you look at his behavior, notwithstanding his denial that he had sex with the bodies, is he capable of it? Obviously he's capable of it. Look exactly what he did.
There were these rumors that he was accountable.
In the Geen case, when the police entered the home, they saw a human heart in a frying pan on his stove. Now, it doesn't take a lot of imagination to raise the question, what's he doing with a human heart in a frying pan on his stove? I mean, did he eat some of the body parts? That's not unheard of. Could he have eaten some of the victims? Their answer is, obviously he's capable of it. There's very little that Geen is not capable of.